They told you history was written to preserve the truth, but they never told you how much of it was carved out, burned away, and left to rot in silence. In 1849, in the quiet farmland of Alabama, a tale was buried so deep, it became a whispered curse. Not a record. A girl, they said, melted from the inside, as if her own body had turned against her. And the most terrifying part was that 3 men of medicine, 3 doctors who had sworn their oath, stood before her bed and refused to lay a hand on her. This was not disease as you understand it, not fever or plague or infection. This was something darker, a condition that seemed less like illness and more like punishment. Imagine being in that farmhouse, the air damp with the weight of despair and fear. The girl's family watching in horror as her skin seemed to collapse, as if the bones beneath had dissolved her face, losing its shape, her voice breaking into hollow echoes of what once had been. The stench they described was unbearable, not merely the scent of death, but of something corrosive, something unnatural seeping from within. It was said the doctors who arrived did not step forward. They looked upon her and then looked away. They whispered to one another in tones so low the family could not hear, and then each declared he would not examine her, because to touch her was to invite the same fate. The church called it the hand of God, a punishment for sins unnamed. The neighbors called it witchcraft, for no fever ever consumed the body in this way. The family sat powerless as her body seemed to melt into the sheets, her form liquefying like wax left too close to a flame. But the flame was invisible, no source, no cause, only the silent, unexplainable undoing of flesh. The doctors left the house that night, not in shame but in terror, and the story of the girl who melted from the inside became the kind of tale no one wanted to repeat aloud. Yet it traveled like smoke through the villages of the South, carried by fear, carried by suspicion, and carried by the sick certainty that there are forces in this world that punish in ways no science can save you from. The farmhouse became a prison of whispers and shadows after the doctors left. The family no longer trusted medicine, no longer trusted prayer. Even the walls seemed to echo with the slow dissolving of her body. Neighbors who once brought bread or water now kept their distance. They crossed themselves at the sight of the house as if it was cursed. The father stood by the door with a shotgun, not to keep thieves away, but to hold back curiosity seekers who came to see the melting girl and left pale and shaken. The air itself was thick with dread because what was happening inside that room could not be explained and could not be stopped. As the days passed, the girl's body sagged inward, her cheeks folding into hollows, her arms thinning, not like starvation, but like the structure of bone itself was liquefying. The mattress grew damp beneath her with fluids no one could name. The smell rolled out through the wooden slats of the home, making animals restless. Horses neighing at night, dogs refusing to come near. The family burned sage herbs, even kerosene rags to cover it, yet nothing erased the stench of what was happening inside. Some said it was the devil's mark. Others said she had been poisoned by hands unseen. But the truth lay in the silence of the doctors, for they carried with them knowledge. They would never write. They had seen cases like this before, but only in fragments locked away in medical notes, hidden in vaults of institutions that would never admit how little they understood. They feared contamination, but not in the way of plague. They feared the power of recognition, that to touch her was to invite the same undoing of flesh. At night, the girl muttered words no one understood. Some swore it was a prayer. Others swore it was a curse. Her sister claimed she heard Latin, though the girl had never learned Latin. The body continued to collapse, and the family began to cover mirrors with cloth, believing what was happening might spread through reflection. This was not sickness. They whispered. It was judgment. The doctors never returned, and the girl's story was carried only in secret tales told around firelight, where men swore that the earth itself had opened a passage through her body to remind them all of forces they could never hope to master. The collapse of her body was only half the terror, for what unnerved those who watched was the way her mind remained awake. Her eyes sank into the skull, but they still moved. They still locked onto the family one by one and seemed to hold them in judgment. When she spoke, her voice rasped like wet wood on fire. and yet it carried words sharp enough to cut through silence. She asked her father why he lied. She asked her mother why she prayed to a God that never listened, and she asked her sister if she was ready to follow her into the pit. Those who heard swore the girl had knowledge she should never have carried, as if her melting flesh had opened her to something beyond. The family feared to sleep, because in the silence of the night, the house trembled with noises not made by human hands. Wooden boards creaked though no one moved. Shadows stretched across the walls, though no lamp burned. The livestock outside grew thin and ill, as if the very ground around the farmhouse had been poisoned. The neighbors whispered that a curse had been called down on the land, and some claimed to see pale lights flickering in the windows, like lanterns carried by invisible hands. The girl's deterioration quickened. Her skin pulled away in strings, her teeth loosened and fell into her throat, and yet she did not die. She lingered in that half place between form and formlessness, as if death itself refused to claim her. The doctors who had fled spoke in whispers in town, claiming that to touch her flesh would have meant becoming her. They said that the body was liquefying from within, as if blood had turned to acid and bones to ash, and yet the fire was not visible to human eyes. Rumors spread that she had read forbidden books, that her bloodline carried an unspoken sin, that Alabama itself was being punished for crimes not yet confessed. A preacher rode from 2 towns away to cleanse the house, but he lasted less than an hour before fleeing pale and wordless. He would not speak of what he saw, but his silence carried its own weight, for silence is often more damning than testimony, and the silence around the girl was louder than any sermon could ever be. By the 4th week, the farmhouse had become a shrine of dread. Curtains stayed drawn, doors locked against the world, and the family moved like shadows, avoiding each other's eyes, as if afraid to acknowledge what they were witnessing. The girl no longer resembled a child of flesh, but a figure of wax. Half collapsed upon itself, her skin stretched thin, then broke in places, leaking fluids that burned the wooden boards beneath her bed, and yet her eyes remained alive, bright, unyielding, and fixed on everyone who dared enter the room. The family begged another physician from a distant county to come. He was promised gold and land, if he would only examine her, but when he stepped inside, the stench drove him back against the door, and his hands trembled so violently he could not open his bag of instruments. He whispered something about corruption, not of the body, but of the soul, and left refusing payment, refusing even to drink water before his ride back, as if he feared taking the curse into his own body. The town began to divide, some claiming the girl had been marked by witchcraft, others insisting she was a vessel of divine punishment, and still others whispering she was evidence of a truth too dangerous to be written. Strange phenomena unfolded in the nights to follow. The family swore they heard voices outside, though no one stood there, knockings at the door that faded when opened footprints in the dirt that led toward the house, but never away. Chickens laid blackened eggs, horses refused to pass the path that led to the farmhouse, and a heavy silence spread across the land, as if the very air had grown too thick to breathe. Those who dared to visit returned, shaken, whispering that they felt watched, not by the girl, but by something using her body as a doorway. Her younger brother, who was too young to understand, climbed onto the bed one evening and placed his hand upon her chest. His hand blistered. Instantly, the skin burning though no flame touched him. He screamed, and the family pulled him away. And in that moment the girl smiled, not with joy, but with the heavy knowing of one who carried a secret no one else dared to speak. Her smile was not her own, and those who saw it swore it belonged to something older, something that had borrowed her body and was slowly consuming it from within. The tale of the melting girl spread beyond Alabama, carried by travelers and merchants who spoke of a farmhouse where flesh dissolved and faith withered. Some called it a plague of the devil. Others whispered of alchemy of experiments left unfinished from a forgotten war. They said there were secret tests once done on slaves, hidden from record, that sought to twist the body from within, and when those horrors were buried, the land itself absorbed them, until one bloodline carried the weight of that corruption into the present. The girl, they said, was not sick. She was chosen to display the cost of sins that no one dared admit. By this time, her body was hardly a body at all, her frame sinking into itself like candle wax, that had burned too long. Yet still she breathed, and still she spoke. Her words came slower now, thick with gurgling sounds, but each syllable carried an unnatural weight. She told her father that his own father had spilled blood in secret. She told her mother that her prayers chained her, instead of freeing her, and she told her sister that the family line would never escape this curse until fire consumed the house itself. These were not the words of a child, but of something that spoke through her voice, like a message smuggled from a place beyond. The family began to lose themselves. The father drank until his mind blurred. The mother sat in silence, clutching rosary beads that cracked beneath her grip, and the sister trembled each night from dreams of drowning in her own skin. The farmhouse was no longer a home. It was an altar to suffering. Neighbors reported seeing faint red light glowing from the cracks of the boarded windows, and some swore they heard chanting, though the family insisted they had not spoken. The land around the house grew barren weeds curling into ash, and trees rotting from the inside out, as if the girl's condition was spreading beyond her body into the very soil. One night, a traveling preacher returned to the house insisting he could free the girl with holy fire. He carried a torch and spoke words of deliverance, but before he could touch the flame to the bed, the girl opened her mouth, and a sound poured out. Not human, not animal, but something deep and grinding like stone being crushed. The preacher dropped his torch and fled, screaming, leaving the family to sit in darkness with a girl whose body continued to dissolve, and whose voice now sounded less like a child and more like the echo of an ancient curse awakening. The morning after the preacher fled, the house was heavier than the air itself. No birds sang. No wind stirred the trees, and the sky pressed down with a strange copper glow, as though the sun itself was sick. The servants refused to enter the east wing, and some left the plantation entirely, saying no wages could pay for what lingered inside. Judge Montgomery locked the gates and forbade anyone from leaving or entering, but whispers spread through Willow Creek faster than he could silence them. The people said the Montgomerys had made a bargain long ago, that their land was bought not only with coin, but with something darker. Dr. Barrett, meanwhile, grew more desperate. He had documented countless illnesses, but none compared to this. Each page of his journal became stained with frantic notes, sketches of Eliza's shifting body, and theories that made less sense, the more he tried to ground them in science. He noted that her organs no longer functioned separately, but had begun to melt together into a pulsing mass that still sustained life somehow. He compared it to the embryonic state of creation, when flesh had not yet chosen its form, but he admitted such speculation bordered on heresy. Still he continued to watch, unable to look away. Eliza spoke less now. Her once clear voice slurred as her mouth softened, losing its structure. Yet when she did speak, her words chilled the marrow. She told Barrett that the creek called her back, that the light beneath the water had marked her, and would not release her until she returned. She begged him not for medicine, but for release sometimes, whispering for him to smother her in her sleep. Yet each time he resolved to end her suffering, he found himself paralyzed by something in her eyes, something that did not belong to the girl, but to the force behind her affliction. That night the family gathered in the parlor. Judge Montgomery insisted they burn the journals and silence the story forever. Mrs. Montgomery clutched her rosary and wept, begging that they try one more cure, while the sister refused to speak at all. Staring into the flames of the hearth, as if she could already see the house in ruins, Barrett argued that the truth must be uncovered, that the creek held the answer, and without facing it, Eliza would perish, and so would the family line. At last, Martha the servant spoke quietly, saying the truth was already inside the girl and spreading to them all. The night of decision came with thunder rolling far in the distance, though no rain ever fell. The air was thick, as if the world itself held its breath. Eliza lay in her bed, little more than a shadow of the girl she had been. Her skin shimmered faintly like water under moonlight, her chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Dr. Barrett sat beside her, his hand trembling as he held the last vial of creek water he had secretly preserved. He knew it was poison, And yet perhaps it was also the cure, for only by confronting the force within her could he hope to drive it out. Judge Montgomery paced the room like a caged animal torn between anger and despair. His pride had been ground to dust, yet he clung to authority as if it could protect him from what he feared. He accused Barrett of meddling with things better left to God, of bringing blasphemy into his house, but his voice shook and his eyes betrayed terror. Mrs. Montgomery knelt at her daughter's side, whispering prayers into the damp air, while Martha stood silently by the door, her face grim as stone. She had seen enough to know that no scripture or science could undo what had begun. When the clock struck midnight, Eliza stirred, her eyes opened wide, not with weakness, but with startling clarity. She fixed her gaze on Barrett and spoke with a voice that was not wholly her own. It told him the water was not sickness, but calling, that the light beneath the creek was only the first doorway to a place where flesh and soul were no longer bound. She said she could hear it now, even in her dreams. A heartbeat beneath the earth that pulled her toward it with every passing moment. Her body shook as though in rhythm with that hidden pulse. The house itself seemed to lean closer as she spoke. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. The fire guttered and grew blue, and the air vibrated with a sound just beyond hearing. Judge Montgomery shouted for her to, "Oh, be silent." But his words vanished, swallowed by the weight of her voice. Barrett realized then that the transformation was nearly complete, not into death, but into something unearthly. Eliza turned to her mother, smiled faintly, though her lips barely held shape, and whispered that she was not afraid anymore. Then she looked back at Barrett and begged him with her last strength to follow her to the creek. Dawn broke pale and hesitant over Willow Creek, casting a sickly glow on the Montgomery plantation. The air smelled of wet earth and old secrets. Barrett carried Eliza's body carefully through the hallways. Her form was rigid, yet strangely coherent, as if she balanced between two realities. The ice packs that had preserved her now hung like dead banners on the walls, reminding everyone of the battle fought against a force no mortal could name. The creek awaited silently, as if it had known their approach for centuries. Martha followed closely, her face lined with fear and awe. Judge Montgomery trailed behind, muttering prayers. Barrett lowered Eliza to the bank. Her eyes opened once more, but the light within them was no longer human. It flickered and danced like the particles in the water that had claimed her. He felt a pull deep in his chest, as if the creek itself whispered promises and threats all at once. With trembling hands, he immersed her fully. The water accepted her like an old friend. The luminescence spread across her skin, consuming what remained of solid form, yet leaving the faint outline of her identity intact. Barrett watched, frozen in horror and wonder, as the particles reacted violently to her presence, uniting and dissolving and spinning in a choreography older than memory. It was then that he understood fully the words of Martha, the place where flesh surrenders. Indeed, the girl was becoming part of something vast, something beyond comprehension. He feared to look away, but the world seemed to hold him captive in that moment. When at last he lifted her from the creek, she was no longer the girl who had entered, nor fully an apparition of it. She smiled a thin, ethereal smile, her hand reaching for his as if to thank him and warn him simultaneously. The ice he had thought might save her was only a bridge to this new state, and now nothing would ever be the same. The Montgomerys never spoke of the event again. The creek was fenced and guarded, yet its whispers continued in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Barrett returned to his studies, haunted and enlightened, forever carrying the vial of water that seemed inert, yet moved in secret. The particles danced within like prisoners, awaiting release, and he knew the knowledge was dangerous, forbidden, transformative. And sometimes, at night, he swore he could hear Eliza laughing softly beneath the surface, a sound both joyous and terrible, reminding him that some mysteries are not to be solved, only survived, and the world contains corners untouched by science, where flesh and spirit intermingle, and the brave or foolish who enter may never return. The girl who melted from the inside had not died. She had passed into the unseen realms, and Barrett lived with the memory. knowing that some truths are forever out of reach, some powers beyond human reckoning, and that in the quiet of the world, there are places still where light moves beneath the surface waiting for another hand to touch it.